My name is Megan. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a nurse at a community hospital here in Rochester, Minnesota. I know it's not exactly what people imagine when they think of the United States, but it's my little corner of the world. It's not New York or Los Angeles, but it has its charm, especially in the fall when the leaves change colors, and even in the harsh winters that make you swear you'll move south after every snowstorm. Our apartment isn't anything special, but it's cozy enough for me and Brandon, my husband of 3 years. We met in college. He was studying software engineering while I was in the nursing program. To this day, I still think it was luck that he twisted his ankle on the library stairs just as I was walking by. Our routine is pretty much this. I wake up at 5:30 a.m., have my coffee while looking out the window at the first rays of sunlight, when it's not snowing, of course, and head to the hospital for my shift from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. Brandon is usually already awake before me, with his eyes glued to the computer solving some problem for the tech company where he works. He often says his best codes come before dawn. On weekends, we like to watch shows, go out to dinner when the budget allows, or simply stay at home reading. The usual, you know? Nothing extraordinary. At least it wasn't until a few months ago. Life was calm and predictable until Brandon's father passed away last winter. It was a sudden heart attack, one of those where you don't even have time to say goodbye. Poor Mr. Harrington. He was a kind man, always bringing apple pie when he visited and telling stories about when Brandon was little. Judith, my mother-in-law, and the late Mr. Harrington lived in St. Paul, about an hour and a half from here. Brandon and I would visit them every couple of months or so, and they would come here occasionally. It was never a particularly close relationship, but it was cordial. After the funeral, we noticed a change in Judith. Well, I noticed. Brandon was too busy dealing with his own grief to notice. She started visiting us more often, always unannounced, which in itself was strange. I was passing through the area, she would say, even though she knew very well that St. Paul isn't exactly in the area of Rochester. I tried to be understanding. After all, she had lost her partner of 40 years. Who was I to deny company to a grieving woman? At first, it was small things. A comment about the dust on the sideboard. A question about why I no longer cooked real food for Brandon. A sigh when I mentioned having to work a weekend shift. Brandon always valued family above all else, she would say, as if I was deliberately choosing to work instead of stay home. I ignored it, of course. I told myself it was just her way, amplified by grief. All mothers-in-law are a bit like that, right? My friends always shared similar stories during our happy hours. You should hear what Joe's mom said about my Thanksgiving. Pie, Ashley once told me, rolling her eyes. So I would take a deep breath and let it go. For the peace. For Brandon. But then I started to notice the looks. They weren't normal looks. They were intense, piercing. When Brandon left the room to take a call or went to the bathroom, Judith's smile would disappear. Her eyes would narrow slightly, and she would look at me as though she was assessing every detail, every flaw, as if she was calculating something. It only lasted a few seconds until Brandon returned, and then the smile would return as though it had never left. But I saw it, and I felt a chill every time it happened. You're imagining things, my friend Ashley said when I mentioned it during lunch at the hospital. She's grieving. People get weird when they're grieving. It's not that, I insisted, pushing my salad around on my plate. It's like she's blaming me for something, like she hates me. She lost her husband, Meg. She's probably just trying to hold on to her son. It's normal. Normal. That word haunted me for weeks. I wanted to believe it was all normal, that I was overreacting, that it was just an adjustment phase for all of us. And then came Thanksgiving. Brandon insisted. We should celebrate at his mom's house this year. She'll be alone, Meg. It's the first holiday without Dad. How could I say no? So we packed some clothes, I made a pumpkin pie, and we drove to St. Paul in a light snowfall. The Harrington house was one of those traditional colonial homes, with a front porch and blue shutters, the kind of house you see in insurance commercials. It felt smaller without Mr. Harrington there. Judith opened the door wearing an apron I recognized as a gift from Brandon last Christmas. "My son!" she exclaimed, opening her arms. They hugged for a long moment before she turned to me. "Megan," she said coldly, giving me a quick, stiff hug. "I hope the trip was smooth." I tried to start conversations while helping in the kitchen. I talked about the hospital, about our plans for the holidays, about how the neighbor had adopted a cat that looked more like a tiger because it was so big. Judith responded with monosyllables, brief nods, vague glances. But when Brandon entered the kitchen, it was like someone had flipped a switch. Suddenly, she was all smiles and stories. The dinner itself was tense, but manageable. Brandon kept the conversation flowing, telling stories about work, asking Judith about her church friends. I smiled, nodded, ate small portions of the food that somehow tasted of guilt and disapproval. It was when we were serving dessert that everything changed. Judith asked me to fetch the porcelain tea set from the sideboard. "It was my grandmother's," she explained to Brandon, not to me. "Your father loved it when I served coffee in this set." Wanted to impress. I wanted to show that I could be the perfect daughter-in-law, that I deserved to be there, that I deserved Brandon. So I carefully stood up, walked to the sideboard, and picked up the delicate porcelain tray with the teapot and cups. That's when I noticed a picture in a silver frame. Brandon as a child, smiling next to a young Judith and Mr. Harrington at some kind of fair. "Oh, how lovely," I commented, trying to make a connection. "Brandon, you must have been about 6 here." It was only a momentary distraction. A brief instant when my eyes left the tray. I didn't realize that one of the cups was dangerously close to the edge. When I turned, it slipped, fell, and shattered on the wooden floor with a sound that seemed too loud for such a small object. The silence that followed was deafening. "I'm sorry," I muttered immediately, crouching to pick up the shards. "I'm so sorry, it was an accident, Of course it was," Judith said, her voice colder than the Minnesota wind in January. "Be careful not to cut yourself." I looked up, and what I saw made me freeze inside. It wasn't just disapproval in her eyes. It was hate. Pure, distilled hate, looking directly at me. It was quick. In the blink of an eye, she was already smiling at Brandon, saying it was nothing, that she had other cups, that accidents happen. But I saw it. And deep in my soul, I knew I had crossed some invisible line. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I helped clean up, smiled when necessary, answered when spoken to. But a part of me was on high alert, as if I were in danger, though I couldn't explain why. That night, in Brandon's old room, I had trouble sleeping. The mattress felt uncomfortable, the sheets too rough. Brandon fell asleep quickly beside me, exhausted from the trip and emotionally drained from being in his childhood home without his father. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the strange sounds of the house, the creaking of the wooden floors, the ticking of the clock in the hallway, the wind whistling through the windows. That's when I heard it. Soft footsteps in the hallway. A door opening and closing. Whispers. I couldn't make out the words, but the sound was rhythmic, measured. I tried to convince myself it was just Judith, maybe on the phone or praying. She was religious, from what Brandon had told me. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep because suddenly I was dreaming. In the dream, I was standing in a dark hallway I recognized as Judith's house. A faint, flickering light came from a door ajar at the end of the hall. I knew I shouldn't go there, but my feet moved on their own. The closer I got, the more I could hear that rhythmic whispering again. When I reached the door, I peeked through the crack. And there was Judith, sitting in a rocking chair, wearing a white nightgown that seemed to glow in the light of a single black candle. In her hands, she held what looked like our wedding album, the same one I had brought to show off some new pictures we'd added. As I watched, frozen in horror, she slowly turned a page, ripped out a photo, one where I was smiling at the camera while Brandon hugged me from behind, and began tearing it methodically. First in half, then into quarters, then into smaller and smaller pieces. All the while, her face was serene, almost placid, but her eyes shone with an intensity that gave me chills to my bones. After reducing the photo to tiny fragments, she held them over the black candle's flame. "Disappear," she whispered as the fragments caught fire. "Disappear from his life. You don't belong in this family." The paper burned quickly, leaving only ashes that floated into a small bowl beside her. She then picked up another photo from the album and began the process again. Photo after photo, all containing my face, all being destroyed methodically. Wanted to scream, I wanted to run. I wanted to make her stop, but I was paralyzed, unable to move or make a sound. It was when she picked up the last photo, our official wedding photo, and looked directly at the door, directly at me. A slow smile spread across her face, a smile that didn't reach her cold eyes. "I know you're there, Megan," she said, her voice strangely calm. "You'll never take him from me. Never." And then she started laughing as she tore the photo, a low, guttural laugh that didn't sound human, that grew in volume as the flames consumed the fragments, that got louder and louder until I woke up with a jolt, gasping for breath and sweating. The room was dark and silent. Brandon was still sleeping peacefully beside me. Just a dream, I told myself. Just a horrible, vivid dream. I looked at the digital clock on the nightstand. 3:33 a.m. Trying not to wake Brandon, I quietly got out of bed and went to the bathroom. I splashed cold water on my face and stared at myself in the mirror. My eyes were wide, my face pale. "It was just a dream," I whispered to my reflection. "She's grieving, she's processing, it's not personal." But when I returned to the room, I noticed something that made my heart freeze. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, even though I was sure we had closed it before going to bed. And for a moment, I thought I saw a shadow moving in the hallway. The next morning, I convinced myself that it had all been a product of my imagination and anxiety. Judith was perfectly cordial during breakfast, asking if we had slept well, offering more coffee, commenting on the weather. But I noticed she avoided direct eye contact with me, always speaking toward Brandon even when answering a question I asked. Our bags were already in the car, ready to head back to Rochester after lunch, when Judith pulled me aside in the kitchen while Brandon carried some containers of leftovers that she insisted we take with us. "I almost forgot," she said, handing me a small amber glass jar. "It's an herbal tonic I make myself, for energy and well-being. You've seemed tired lately, dear. A little run down." I hesitated, the jar cold in my hand. "Thank you, but you really didn't have to." "It's no trouble at all." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "A few drops in water or tea 3 times a day? I'm sure it will do wonders for you." She squeezed my hand briefly, her carefully painted red nails pressing against my skin with enough force to be uncomfortable, but not enough for me to complain without seeming dramatic. And so we ended our Thanksgiving visit with a jar of homemade tonic and a growing feeling of unease that I couldn't explain to Brandon. "You're quiet," he commented during the drive back. "Still upset about the cup? Mom really didn't mind, you know." "It's not that," I replied, staring out the window at the snow-covered landscape. "Just tired, I guess. Maybe you should try that tonic Mom gave you," he suggested, placing his hand on my knee. "She's always been good with natural remedies. When I was a kid, she'd cure any cold with her special teas." I forced a smile and changed the subject. The jar stayed at the bottom of my purse, untouched. It was the following week that things started to get worse. First, It was insomnia. I would lie in bed, exhausted after 12-hour shifts at the hospital, and just couldn't sleep. I'd stare at the ceiling for hours, my mind replaying the strange dream at Judith's house, wondering what could be in that amber jar, questioning if I was overreacting. Then came the mistakes at work. Small ones at first, forgetting to note a patient's blood pressure, mixing up people's names, losing focus in the middle of conversations. My colleagues started looking at me strangely. "Are you okay, Megan?" my supervisor asked after I had mixed up 2 medications, a mistake I caught before administering them, thank God. "I'm just not sleeping well," I replied. At home, things were strange too. Brandon, always so patient and loving, started getting irritated by little things. Dishes left in the sink, a forgotten glass of water on the coffee table, the sound of my alarm in the morning. "You're different," he said one night, after a debate over what movie to watch. Something so trivial it shouldn't even have been a discussion. Distant, irritable. "Is it work?" "I don't know what's going on with me," I confessed, feeling tears well up. "I'm so tired, but I can't sleep. I'm anxious all the time. And I have these dreams." "What dreams?" he asked, sounding genuinely concerned for the first time in days. I hesitated. How could I explain that I kept dreaming of his mother destroying photos of me, murmuring strange words, laughing while my image burned? How could I tell him that I woke up with the feeling that there was someone in the room, watching, waiting? "Nightmares," I answered vaguely. "Probably just stress." He nodded but looked thoughtful. That night, he slept on the couch. "Just so you can rest better," he explained. But we both knew that wasn't the only reason. It was that weekend that the rash appeared. It started as red, itchy patches around my wrists, as if I'd developed an allergy to some soap or lotion. Within a few days, it spread to my arms, neck, and chest. It looked like hives, but no antihistamine relieved it. The dermatologist seemed puzzled. "It doesn't look like a typical allergic reaction," he commented, examining my skin. "Have you used any new products? Changed detergent? Eaten anything different?" I answered no to all the questions. I didn't. Mention the amber jar that remained untouched in the drawer of my dresser, hidden under piles of socks. He prescribed a steroid cream and sent me home. The rash didn't improve. In fact, it seemed to get worse after each dream about Judith, and then she started calling. Every day. Sometimes more than once a day. Always asking to speak to Brandon first, having long whispered conversations that he would take into another room. Then, almost as an afterthought, she'd ask to speak to me. "How are you, dear?" she'd ask, her voice as sweet as poisoned honey. "I'm fine," I'd answer automatically. "Brandon told me you're not sleeping well, that you have a rash. Sounds like stress, don't you think? Maybe you're working too much. Brandon always says how dedicated you are to your work." There was something accusatory in the way she said, "dedicated to your work," as if it were a terrible flaw. "Are you taking the tonic I gave you?" she would invariably ask before we hung up. "I haven't had a chance yet," I'd lie. "Oh, you should. I'm sure it would help with all these issues you're having. Brandon always responded so well to my remedies." After 3 weeks of this growing torment, Judith announced she would visit us. "Just for a few days," she told Brandon on the phone. "I'm worried about you two, especially Megan. Maybe I can help." When I told Ashley about the impending visit during our lunch, she frowned. "You know, this is strange. I've been dreaming about her too." I almost choked on my coffee. "What? What do you mean?" Ashley shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "It's silly, I know, but I've been having these dreams where I see your mother-in-law in a dark room, doing something with photos and candles. It's disturbing. I wake up feeling dirty somehow." My blood ran cold. I had never told Ashley about my own dreams. "Since when have you been having these dreams?" Since you showed me that photo of her on your phone after Thanksgiving. It's weird, isn't it? I've never even met the woman in person. My mind was racing. If Ashley was having the same dreams, it meant it wasn't just my imagination. There was something more going on. That afternoon, in a desperate impulse, I Googled dreams with black candles and burned photos. The results were a mix of generic dream interpretations and a few forums about the occult. I clicked on one called Supernatural Experiences and Protection. I spent hours reading accounts from people who claimed to be victims of negative work, spells, curses, negative energies directed at them. Many mentioned similar symptoms to mine: insomnia, unexplained rashes, deteriorating relationships, vivid and disturbing dreams. One comment in particular caught my attention. If you are repeatedly dreaming of someone performing rituals with your personal belongings, photos, clothes, etc., and experiencing negative physical and emotional effects, it's possible you are under a binding negative spell. These practices usually involve creating a harmful energetic connection between the practitioner and the target. Spell? Curse? I had always been skeptical about this kind of thing. As a nurse, I was trained to think in scientific terms, intangible causes and effects. But nothing that had been happening to me had a rational explanation. I kept reading, growing more anxious, until I found a post from someone named Elderwise. If you suspect you are under negative influence, do not use any substance, food, drink, oils, creams, given to you by the person you suspect is causing the issue. This could intensify the connection. Seek help from an experienced practitioner in breaking negative bonds. I stared at the message for a long time. How did this person know I was in Minnesota? I hadn't mentioned that in my message. Maybe it was a guess based on my IP or some information in my profile that I hadn't realized was visible. The next day, while Brandon was at work, I called the number provided. After a few rings, an elderly, raspy voice answered. Johnson Residence. Hello, I stammered. My name is Megan. Elderwise gave me your number. I think I need your help. There was a long silence on the other end. Elderwise, the voice repeated. It's been a while since I've heard that name. Can you come today at 3:33? That specific number, 3:33, the same time I'd seen on the clock when I woke up from my first nightmare about Judith, sent a chill down my spine. Yes, I replied. I can come. I wrote down the address she gave me in a neighborhood I didn't know well in Minneapolis. I made up an excuse to Brandon about visiting Ashley after work, and by 3 p.m., I was driving north, my heart pounding against my chest. The apartment building was old but well-maintained. Apartment 303, third floor. Again, the number 3 seemed to haunt me. I rang the bell exactly at 3:33, according to my clock. The door was opened by an elderly African-American woman, perhaps, in her 70s with gray hair pulled back in an elegant bun. She wore a simple floral print dress and a light blue cardigan. Nothing about her suggested a practitioner of magic. She looked more like a grandmother about to offer cookies and tea. Megan, she said, not as a question, but as a confirmation. Come in. The apartment was surprisingly airy and bright, with plants on every available surface. The smell of lavender and something more exotic, perhaps sandalwood, filled the air. On the walls were a mix of conventional landscape paintings and black and white photographs of people I assumed were her family. Sit, she instructed, pointing to a couch covered with a colorful patchwork quilt. She sat in a rocking chair facing me, her dark eyes studying me intensely. Did you bring something from her? She asked abruptly. Her? From the person causing your suffering. I swallowed hard and pulled the amber jar from my bag. I had never opened it, but had carried it with me for reasons I couldn't explain. Eliza took the jar carefully, using a small cloth to avoid direct contact. She held it up to the light, examined it, and then smelled it without opening it. She murmured. Interesting choice of ingredients. What is it? She placed the jar on a small table beside her. Nothing you'd want to ingest, dear. I can smell sage. Probably rosemary, too. Those are common herbs for cleansing, but when combined with negative intent and certain other ingredients, well, let's just say it's good you didn't open this. I felt a shiver run down my spine. So, you believe me? You think my mother-in-law is doing something to me? Eliza studied me for a long moment before answering. It doesn't matter whether I believe it or not. What matters is what's happening to you. And something is happening. That much is clear as day. She got up and went to a shelf, where she grabbed a small ornate mirror. Returning, she placed it in front of me. Look at yourself, Megan. Really look. What I saw shocked me. My face was pale, with deep dark circles. The rash had spread to my neck, irregular red patches that looked more intense than I'd realized. My eyes seemed dull, lifeless. When was the last time you had a full night's sleep? Eliza asked gently. I don't know. Maybe before Thanksgiving? She nodded, as if confirming something to herself. And your husband? How is he? Brandon's different, irritable, distant. We argue over everything. He's never been like this before. And you've been having these problems since that Thanksgiving visit, since I broke that cup, since that dream. Eliza set the mirror aside and took my hands in hers. Her hands were surprisingly warm and firm. What do you know about your mother-in-law, Megan? About her past? Her beliefs? I thought for a moment. Not much, actually. Brandon says she's always been religious. She always had an herb garden and made her own remedies. That's all I know. And Brandon's father? How was their relationship? From what Brandon said, they were very close, almost dependent on each other. Mr. Harrington made all the big decisions, but always consulted Judith first. It was like they were one unit. Eliza released my hands and leaned back in her chair. Here's what I think is happening, Megan. Your mother-in-law lost half of herself when her husband passed away. Now, she's trying to fill that void by clinging to her son. You represent a threat to that. But Brandon and I have been married for 3 years. Why now? Because before, she had her husband. Now, she only has her son. Eliza stood up again and walked to the window, looking outside for a moment before turning back to me. She's using a form of traditional practice. It's not uncommon in some rural communities in Minnesota, especially among descendants of certain European groups. It's a mix of Christianity with ancient traditions from their countries of origin, what we call work or craft. It's not necessarily bad, but like any tool, it can be used in harmful ways. I shook my head, trying to process. So, she's cursing me? Like in horror movies? Eliza smiled slightly. Nothing that dramatic, dear. She's creating a negative binding between the two of you, draining your energy, much like an energetic parasite. It's not so much a curse as it is a form of spiritual manipulation. It's affecting your well-being and, by extension, your relationship with Brandon. How do I undo this? I asked, surprising myself with how quickly I accepted her explanation. But after weeks of unexplained suffering, I was willing to consider anything. First, we need to cut the connection she's established. Then, we'll create protection to prevent her from establishing another one. And how do we do that? Eliza went to a cabinet and began pulling out several items. White and blue candles, small bottles of oils and dried herbs, a small ceramic bowl, and a long red cord. We need to perform a bond-cutting and purification ritual. This isn't a quick job, Megan. It will take time and commitment on your part. And you must understand that we are not trying to harm your mother-in-law. We're just interrupting what she's doing and protecting you. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. When can we start? Right now, if you have time. The first part will take about 2 hours. I grabbed my phone to check the time. It was almost 4:30 p.m. Brandon wouldn't expect me to be home until 7 p.m., since he thought I was with Ashley. "I have time," I confirmed. Eliza began preparing what she called a purification bath. She filled the bowl with warm water and added small amounts of different herbs and oils, murmuring softly as she worked. "This is rosemary, for protection, and purification," she explained. "Rue, to break negative influences. Basil, to strengthen your spirit. And a little sea salt, to absorb negativity." The scent that emanated from the mixture was strong, but not unpleasant. Fresh herbs with a hint of something citrusy. "This is not an immersion bath," she explained with a smile, noticing my expression. "You will only wash your hands, face, and the back of your neck in this water. These are the main points of energy entry and exit in the body." As the water rested, Eliza lit 2 candles, one white and one blue, and placed them in simple metal candle holders. "The white is for purification," she explained. "The blue is for peace and protection. They will guide us in the work." Next, she took the red cord and stretched it between her hands, measuring approximately the width of her outstretched arms. "This cord will represent the connection your mother-in-law established with you. Red because it's the color of blood. Literal, in your case, since she's family to your husband. And symbolic, because she's draining your life force." Eliza guided me to the bowl with the herb bath. "Close your eyes. Take a deep breath. Imagine that this water has the power to dissolve anything negative attached to you." I followed her instructions, dipping my hands into the warm water. It was relaxing, and for a moment, I felt as though a weight was being lifted from my shoulders. "Now, wash your face. Don't rush. Feel the water taking away her influence." The water had a comforting aroma that reminded me of a mix of forest and grandmother's kitchen. I carefully washed my face, feeling each drop against my skin. Lastly, the back of your neck. I tilted my head forward as Eliza took a small container, filled it with the herb water, and gently poured it over the back of my neck. The sensation was invigorating, as if something was being released from within me. After drying my face and neck with a clean towel she offered, Eliza had me sit in front of the lit candles. "Now comes the part where we cut the cord. I'll need you to hold one end of this red cord while I hold the other. Close your eyes and visualize your mother-in-law at the other end of this cord, pulling your energy, sending negative thoughts, influencing your husband against you." I closed my eyes and the image came easily. Judith, with that look of hatred, holding the other end of the cord that seemed to pulse like a vein. While I recite a few words, I want you to mentally repeat, "I cut this bond with love and determination. I free myself from this negative influence. I protect my energy and my home." Eliza began speaking in a low voice. I couldn't distinguish whether it was English or another language, but the sound was rhythmic and almost hypnotic. Mentally, I repeated the words she had instructed, visualizing the cord growing weaker, Judith's influence diminishing. After a few minutes, I felt a chill run through my body, despite the warmth in the apartment. I opened my eyes just in time to see Eliza cut the cord with a small silver scissor. It was as if something snapped in the air between us. "It's done," she said simply, placing the 2 halves of the cord in a small ceramic bowl. "This part of the work is finished. Now we need to create protection." She went to a drawer and pulled out a small light blue fabric pouch, some small crystals, and more dried herbs. "This is a protection pouch. I'll fill it with quartz crystals to amplify positive energy, salt to absorb negativity, lavender for peace, rosemary for protection, and a small piece of hematite for grounding and strength. You should keep it with you at all times, in your purse, in your pocket, under your pillow when you sleep." I watched as she carefully prepared the small pouch, adding each item with deliberate intention. "There's one more thing," she said, tying the pouch with a blue cord. "You need to set clear boundaries with your mother-in-law. When she comes to visit, don't accept anything from her. Food, drinks, gifts. Be polite, but firm. And ask Brandon not to take his conversations to another room. Everything should be open, transparent. I took the pouch she offered me. It was small, discreet, and surprisingly heavy for its size. What if she notices what I've done? What if she gets angry? What if she tells Brandon? Eliza smiled gently. What will you tell him about today? I thought for a moment. I'll probably say I saw an alternative medicine specialist for my rash, and insomnia since traditional doctors weren't helping. And isn't that true? Don't lie to your husband, Megan. Just simplify it. Say you sought holistic help. If he asks more, explain that it involved an herbal bath and visualization, techniques to reduce stress. It's the truth, I smiled, appreciating her practical wisdom. And Brandon? How do I reverse what she's done to him? The work we've done today should start weakening her influence over him too, but it would be better if he could do his own cleansing ritual. Maybe you can suggest a relaxing bath with Epsom salts and a few drops of rosemary essential oil. Tell him you read that it helps with stress. I nodded, already mentally planning how to approach this with Brandon. One last thing, Megan. This work is not an instant magical solution. It will take time for the effects to fully dissipate. And if your mother-in-law notices what's happening, and she probably will when your efforts start to fail, she might try to intensify her actions. That's why continuous protection is crucial. She could try something worse? Eliza paused for a moment. I don't think it's likely. The kind of work she's doing requires proximity and a certain level of intimacy, gifts given and accepted, access to your space. If you cut off those pathways, she'll be limited. I left Eliza's apartment with the protection pouch in my bag, instructions for a daily cleansing ritual involving more herbal baths that she had given me in small labeled pouches, and a sense of hope I hadn't felt in weeks. On the way home, I noticed that the rash on my wrist seemed less red, less irritated. Probably just suggestion, the skeptical part of my mind said. But another part, a part that was starting to wake up, whispered that maybe, just maybe, there were more things between heaven and earth than my scientific training had allowed me to believe. Brandon was in the kitchen when I got home making dinner, something he hadn't done in weeks. Hey, he said, looking almost shy. I thought I'd make that lemon chicken you like. I was momentarily speechless. This was the Brandon I knew, not the distant and irritable man from the past few weeks. That sounds great, I replied, feeling a wave of relief. How was your day? The evening progressed with an ease we hadn't felt in a long time. We talked about work, watched an episode of a show we both liked, and even laughed together, a sound that seemed forgotten in our apartment. When we went to bed, Brandon pulled me close, hugging me from behind like he used to. I'm sorry for being so strange lately, he murmured into my hair. I don't know what got into me. I placed my hand over his. It's okay. I think we've both been under a lot of stress. The protection pouch was safely under my pillow. I fell asleep faster than I had on any night since that fateful Thanksgiving weekend, with no disturbing dreams to torment me. In the following days, the changes continued. The rash started to visibly disappear. I managed to sleep for longer stretches, without waking up in a panic. Brandon gradually returned to his old self, affectionate and patient. At work, my concentration improved, and mistakes became fewer. Ashley noticed the difference immediately when we met for lunch. Wow, you look better, she commented. What happened? I told her an edited version of the truth, that I'd consulted an alternative medicine specialist who helped me with stress reduction techniques and herbal remedies. Well, whatever it is, it's working, she said. Oh, and by the way, those strange dreams about your mother-in-law? They've stopped. Completely. I smiled, feeling a quiet confirmation that Eliza's ritual was working beyond myself. The biggest proof, however, came when Judith arrived for her promised visit, exactly 1 week after my session with Eliza. Brandon picked her up from the train station while I finished preparing the guest room. I had the protection pouch in my pocket and had diligently followed Eliza's daily cleansing instructions. When they arrived, I was shocked by Judith's appearance. She seemed smaller, somehow, more fragile. Her normally impeccable hair was a bit tousled, and there were dark circles under her eyes. "Judith," I greeted, trying to sound warm but keeping a safe distance. "Welcome. I hope the trip was smooth." Her eyes studied me, and for a brief moment, I saw confusion in them, as if she couldn't see me clearly. "Thank you," she replied, her voice lacking the syrupy tone she usually used in Brandon's presence. It was tiring. During dinner, I noticed she barely touched her food, only pushing it around her plate. The conversation was superficial, and surprisingly, she didn't try to monopolize Brandon's attention or make passive-aggressive comments about my house or domestic skills. At one point, when Brandon stepped out to take a work call, Judith and I were left alone at the kitchen table. I expected to feel that familiar wave of anxiety, but instead, I felt calm, grounded. "You seem different," Judith said abruptly, her eyes trying to pierce mine. I kept steady eye contact. "I've been feeling a lot better lately. Have you been sleeping well?" "Very well, thank you." I discreetly touched the pouch in my pocket. "And you? Brandon mentioned you've been having trouble sleeping." She looked momentarily alarmed. "He said that?" "Yes." "Something about nightmares?" Judith looked away, and for the first time since I'd met her, she seemed vulnerable. "Yes, well, I've been having some disturbing dreams. And my herb garden. Something strange happened. It all dried up suddenly, without explanation." I felt a pang of guilt, remembering Eliza's words about how the ritual wasn't meant to harm Judith, only to interrupt her negative influence. But another part of me, the part that had suffered weeks of torment, felt a small satisfaction. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and part of me genuinely felt that way. Stress can do strange things to our bodies and minds. She looked at me again, this time with something close to respect. "Yes, it can." The rest of the visit passed without any significant incidents. Judith remained reserved, almost cautious around me. She didn't offer any home remedies, didn't comment on my appearance or house, and surprisingly, didn't try to have private conversations with Brandon. On the second day of her stay, Brandon commented on the change while we were preparing breakfast together. "Mom seems different with you," he said. "Less, I don't know, intense?" I shrugged. "Maybe she's just adjusting to a new phase in life." "Maybe," he agreed, giving me a kiss on the forehead. "Whatever it is, I'm glad you two seem to be getting along better." When Judith left on the third day, she gave me a brief, awkward hug at the station. The first genuine hug we'd ever shared. "Take care, Megan," she said, and there was a note of resignation in her voice. "And take care of him too, always," I replied, feeling like we had reached some kind of unspoken understanding. In the weeks and months that followed, life gradually returned to normal, or rather, to a new normal. The rash disappeared completely. My work performance improved so much that I received a recommendation for a promotion. Brandon and I rediscovered the ease and comfort that had always characterized our relationship. Judith's calls became less frequent, and when she did call, it was respectful and brief. She no longer tried to visit uninvited, and when we invited her for Christmas, it was a surprisingly pleasant celebration. I continued with the protection rituals Eliza had taught me, though less frequently as time went on. The protection pouch remained in my bag, a constant reminder that the world held more mysteries than I had ever considered. Ashley occasionally asked about my miracle healer, as she called Eliza, and I gave out the number when others we knew. mentioned similar problems with insomnia or unexplained anxiety. On a quiet spring afternoon, almost 6 months after my first visit to Eliza, I decided to go back to her apartment to thank her in person. The building was there, just as I remembered, but when I rang the bell for apartment 303, a young woman answered. "Sorry," she said, looking confused. "I'm looking for Eliza Johnson?" The woman shook her head. "I don't know anyone by that name. I've lived here for 2 years." Perplexed, I thanked her and left. In the lobby, I checked the building directory, but there was no Eliza Johnson listed. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number I had used to book my appointment. An automated message informed me that the number no longer existed. For a moment, I felt a shiver of unease. Had I imagined everything? But no, the results were real. The change in my life was real. The protection pouch in my bag was real. As I walked back to my car, I took a deep breath of the spring air. Maybe Eliza was just a name she used. Maybe she had moved. Or maybe, and this thought brought a smile to my face, there were things in this world that didn't need rational explanations. That night, I shared the strange experience with Brandon, something I had never done before. To my surprise, he listened without skepticism, only curiosity. "You know," he said thoughtfully after I finished my story, "my paternal grandmother used to say there were wise women in her family, from the old country, as she called it. Women who could heal and protect, who understood herbs and energies. Mom always dismissed those stories as superstitions, but Grandma insisted they were true. That explained a lot about Judith's skills, I thought. Knowledge passed down, maybe distorted over time, or used in ways they weren't intended for. Do you think these things are possible?" I asked. "Influencing people through, well, rituals and intentions?" Brandon interlaced his fingers with mine. "I think there's more in heaven and earth than our philosophy can dream of, as Shakespeare would say. I don't know if I believe in magic like in the movies, but energy? Intention? The power of the mind over the body? That's science, in a way." I smiled, appreciating his balanced perspective. "Well, whatever happened, I'm glad we're okay now, all of us." And we were. On Judith's next visit, a few months later, she brought plants for our little garden. Protective plants, I noticed, like lavender and rosemary. A peace offering, perhaps, a silent admission, a new page. I still carry my protection pouch. I still occasionally do an herbal bath using the mixtures Eliza taught me. Not out of fear, but out of respect for what I've learned, that our energies affect each other, that intentions have power, that bonds can nourish or drain. And when I look back on those dark months, I don't feel anger toward Judith. I understand that grief and the fear of losing her son to me led her to a dark place. I understand that sometimes we use the tools we know, even when they're the wrong ones. Brandon and I are stronger now, more aware of boundaries and the importance of protecting our space, our relationship. And in a strange way, I owe part of that to Judith's unintentional intervention. If she hadn't pushed me to the limit, I would never have discovered a part of the world, and of myself, that always existed in the shadows of my perception. Some nights, when the moon is full and the air feels charged with possibilities, I think of Eliza and wonder who, or what, she really was. But then I smile and realize that maybe some questions don't need answers. Maybe mystery, like faith, is a form of magic in itself.